Welcome to Geekstorians, the show where we dig through the stories behind the stories and occasionally discover something's gone in and changed the evidence. I'm Dave from Geektown, and today we're looking at this strange, messy and very human fight over who gets to decide what's real in our favourite universes. Because once upon a time the creator spoke and the world just nodded. Then one day a single frame shifted and everything else wobbled with it. This is the battle for Canon. It's 1997. You've queued for hours to see the Star Wars Special Edition, the remastered resurrection of a film you know so well you could probably operate the Falcon yourself. Han sits across from Greedo. Tense standoff, smug grin, hand itching towards the trigger. And then, Greedo shoots first. The entire cinema jolts. The sound is almost psychic, thousands of brains performing the same internal audit. Hang on, that's not how it happened. For 20 years there was no debate. Han shot first. That was the truth carved into fandom's very bones. And suddenly, it wasn't. In that moment, something rippled through the room. A great disturbance in fandom as if millions of viewers all cried out, "Wait, what?" and then fell into stunned silence. That tiny edit did what no Death Star ever could. It shattered the certainty of canon. And once that certainty cracked, fans everywhere started looking at their favourite stories with entirely new eyes. Before fandom started treating fictional universes like legally binding documents, stories used to wander a bit. Not disastrously, just with the sort of carefree confidence that you get from knowing nobody can rewind and check your homework. A character could disappear for half a season, then reappear with a different haircut and a completely new backstory, and audiences would simply nod and go, "Yeah, that seems fine." Continuity wasn't sacred. Continuity wasn't even really expected. It was more of a happy accident. Like when a dog somehow manages to sit exactly where you want it to. Television shows assumed you watched whatever episode happened to be on and in whatever order the scheduler fancied that week. Comics reinvented themselves whenever the creative team changed, which was roughly every other Thursday. Films took it for granted that you'd see them once in the cinema and then spend the next decade misremembering them at parties. And because nobody could easily revisit anything, the past stayed pleasantly blurry. You remember vibes, not details. Plot points floated around like folklore, half true, half guessed, all acceptable. And then came home video. The Great Reckoning. Suddenly fans could rewatch scenes, pause them, compare them, create binders, make timelines, start sentences with "actually if you look closely," which is the sound of modern canon being born. Because once the audience could check, they could challenge. Once they could revisit, they could notice. Once they could notice, dear creator, your wiggles in continuity were no longer going to slide quietly under the carpet. A brief little side note, because it's too delicious to ignore, the term canon originally meant the approved books of the Bible, which, given the number of sequels, retcons, contradictions and unexpected spin-offs involved, proves that this debate has been going on for at least 2,000 years, and that continuity errors are older than television by roughly 2 millennia. But anyway, creators wanted flexibility. The right to tidy up, tweak things, adjust the character, revise a moment, or occasionally pretend a whole subplot never happened. Fans wanted stability, the comfort of a world that stayed put once it existed on a shelf next to the toaster. That tension between creative freedom and fan memory is the spark. The moment a fictional universe stops being a playground and starts being a shared asset. For a while, this stayed manageable. A bit of polite grumbling, a few fanzine essays, the occasional letter written entirely in capital letters. And then a filmmaker presses a button, changes a single moment in a single film, and millions of people realized that canon wasn't fixed. It could move, it could shift, it could blink, and the battle was on. When the Star Wars Special Editions arrived in 1997, they were marketed as a gift, a shiny, polished cinematic anniversary treat. A chance, we were told, to see Star Wars the way George Lucas had always meant it to be seen. Fans queued around the block. They were excited. They trusted the man who built the galaxy. And then the galaxy shifted. Not with a dramatic reveal or a bold new character arc, well, unless you count that somewhat crowbarred in Jabba the Hutt scene where Han steps awkwardly on Jabba's tail like a man trying to leave a party without starting a fight, but just one tiny surgical adjustment. A moment that's barely even a second long. The kind of tweak you miss if you blinked. Except nobody missed this one. Greedo shoots first. You can feel the audience tense. Not angrily, not scandalized, just that collective tightened pause of, hang on, that's not right. It wasn't nostalgia, it wasn't fanboy nitpicking. It was something deeper, a moral axis flipped in real time. Because Han shooting first said something about the character, his edge, his survival instinct, that little streak of don't mess with me that made him fascinating. Greedo shooting first said something else entirely, and that change, that single subtle edit, did something Lucas never expected. It broke the illusion that a story's past wasn't stable, not because it was altered, but because it was altered retrospectively. The original versions still existed in fans' memories, in books, and in VHS tapes tucked safely under beds. But now there was a sanctioned version, a correction. It was like Lucas had reached into millions of heads and said, actually, you're misremembering that bit, here's the proper version. Fans were unimpressed, to say the least. Because fandom is built on shared experience. It relies on everyone remembering the same story. And suddenly, the creator was telling them that their shared memory was wrong. New effects, fine. Cleaned up frames, lovely. Polished matte lines, go wild. But altering character-defining moments, that touched a nerve. Han and Greedo became the battle flag. Not because it was the biggest change, but because it was the one that everyone noticed. And the argument wasn't really about the scene at all. It was about authority. Who decides what actually happens in a fictional universe? The creator? The fans? The version you saw at age 7? The version on your VHS? The version now on the cinema screen? The version on the next DVD? The version after that on Blu-ray? The special editions were supposed to be celebrations. Instead, they revealed something uncomfortable. Fans didn't just love these stories, they felt a kind of custodianship over them. And Lucas, for the first time, ran into a wall made out of millions of people saying, no, that's not how we remember it, and our memory counts too. The debate spilled into magazines, newspapers, and eventually online forums. It was the opening salvo of a much larger cultural shift, the moment the fanbase realized creators weren't the sole arbiters of truth anymore. The first battle of the canon wars had begun. And out in the wider world, in early chat rooms, newsgroups, mailing lists, and soon enough, entire websites, fans began sharpening their arguments. Because if one edit could rewrite the past, what else might be up for negotiation? If the special editions were the spark, the internet was the oxygen. Because once you gave fans the ability to gather, compare notes, and shout across continents in real time, something extraordinary happened. They became organized. And organized fans are, historically speaking, the natural enemy of just trust us. The earliest online fandoms lived in pre-social media relics with wonderfully cheerful names like Usenet, rec.art.fs.wars, and alt.everything you can think of. These weren't websites, they were digital basements, big rooms full of strangers passionately debating things nobody else in their lives wanted to hear about. And suddenly, the debate over canon, over what really happened, had a battlefield. Because for the first time in history, fans could compare experiences, cross-reference scenes, share VHS captures, cite reviews, and treat continuity like a group project. They weren't just viewers anymore, they were investigators. This is where fandom goes forensic. Frame-by-frame analysis, transcript comparisons, people posting detailed essays with titles like The Moral Ramifications of Hands Trigger Discipline, a 27-point breakdown. You had fans building entire timelines to reconcile inconsistencies that creators had never even noticed. You had arguments running for months about which version of a scene was definitive. You had people writing guides just to explain which cut of Blade Runner you should watch if you wanted to be taken seriously at a party. The internet didn't just give fandom a megaphone, it gave it tools. It let everybody become a lore keeper, a continuity clerk, a part-time historian of fictional events. And this presented creators with a new, frankly terrifying development. Fans now had receipts. Before, if you tweaked a detail, nobody remembered. Now, somebody on a forum would instantly post a time-stamped side-by-side comparison and ask, "Why have you changed this, George?" It wasn't antagonistic, not at first. It was curiosity, then concern, then eventually the creeping realization that maybe stories weren't as stable as everybody had assumed. Meanwhile, the creators were still operating on 1970s logic, that you could adjust things quietly, that audiences would move on, and that nobody would notice if the backstory had changed slightly between printings. But now millions of people were noticing. In fact, noticing had become a hobby. And the conversations grew. Fans didn't just want continuity, they wanted coherence. They wanted a universe that honoured its own past, because they honoured it. This is when you start seeing something new in the culture. The belief that canon isn't just whatever the creator says next, it's a shared inheritance. A fictional world is no longer a one-way broadcast. It's a collaboration between everybody who remembers it. For creators, that's either liberating or horrifying depending on your temperament. Because now there's a watchdog, and the watchdog has spreadsheets. But we're not at war yet. For now, it's all gentle tension and polite corrections. Creators adjusting, fans pushing back, everybody learning the rules of this new ecosystem. But the shift has begun. Fans aren't just audience members anymore, they're curators. And once the audience starts curating the story, the creator is no longer the only person holding the pen. By the late 90s and early 2000s, fans weren't just noticing continuity, they were ready to interrogate it. And television, in a moment of spectacular misjudgment or genius, depending on your outlook, decided to lean in. Writers didn't just tolerate forensic fandom, they baited it. Sowing clues, leaving trails, dropping cryptic lines designed to send discussion boards into full red string mode. This is the birth of the showrunner era, a period when TV suddenly wanted to be complicated. Long arcs, hidden symbolism, season-long mysteries, characters who appeared to be dead but were only dead-ish, the kind of storytelling that politely suggests you keep notes. And right in the middle of all this comes a series that would turn canon from casual pastime into competitive blood sport. Lost. Lost wasn't just a show, it was a global puzzle delivered one baffling clue at a time. Fans built theories with a zeal of people preparing for a PhD. Message boards filled with diagrams, maps, timelines, essays that began with, "I'm not saying it's purgatory, but..." Every week was a new battle between interpretation and intent, and creators, bless them, encouraged this. They fed the machine, they watched theories spread like weeds and gently whispered, "You're warm, you're cold, somehow you're both at once." Then you have Battlestar Galactica, a show that treated prophecy, visions, and secret identities like a puzzle box trapped inside a Rubik's Cube. Fans combed through episodes looking for meaning, and the writers sat back and sipped tea, thrilled and terrified that people were actually connecting dots that they themselves hadn't fully placed yet. And then Sherlock. Sherlock didn't just invite forensic analysis, it leaned right over the table and said, "Right, let's see how clever you lot really are." Every detail was a clue, every frame was evidence, every fan became a detective, and every detective became convinced the writers were playing a deeper game. Which is adorable in hindsight. When the infamous rooftop twist lands, fans created theories so elaborate they would have required 3 film crews, a fake corpse, hydraulic machinery, and Benedict Cumberbatch performing a mid-air costume change. Because now fans weren't just watching, they were participating. The story belonged to them too, or at least that's how it felt. This era created a brand new expectation. Stories must make sense, stories must be internally consistent, and stories must reward attention. And if they didn't, fans would riot. Gently online with very long posts, but riot nonetheless. The showrunners had accidentally created the perfect storm, a world where creators were expected to be omniscient and fans felt entitled to an explanation that tied up every loose end in a beautiful bow. Canon wasn't a simple ledger anymore, it was a battlefield. Because once fans realised they could push back, and once creators realised people were tracking continuity with the seriousness of accountants at tax time, the power dynamic shifted. The audience no longer saw themselves as passengers, they were co-pilots. And if the story swerved unexpectedly or contradicted itself, they were going to grab the controls. This is the moment Canon becomes a tug of war between creators designing mysteries and fans determined to solve them, sometimes better than the storytellers intended. The tension is rising, and soon the arguments won't just be about clues or continuity, they'll be about ownership. Because if the fans are the ones carrying the story's history, what happens when they decide they care more about it than the people writing it? For a while, the relationship between creators and fans was a bit like a polite book club. People disagreed, of course, passionately, loudly, and sometimes with diagrams, but it stayed within the comforting bounds of interpretation. Then something shifted. Fans didn't just analyse stories anymore, they began to protect them. And nothing inspires devotion quite like the belief that you, specifically you, understand the story better than the person making it. This is where Canon turns into a full-blown turf war. When Sherlock finally revealed how Holmes had survived that rooftop fall, fans had already built complex, mathematically improbable theories involving stunt doubles, body swaps, paramedics on retainer, drones, hypnotism, and, in one case, an entire street's worth of people who apparently were in on it. So when writers offered their explanation, a very large corner of fandom responded with the dramatic equivalent of, "No, try again." For the first time, a huge audience simply rejected the official answer. Not disputed it, not critiqued it, just rejected it. That was new. Then came the final season of Game of Thrones, which managed to unite audiences across continents in a single thunderous conclusion. This is not the ending we ordered. Now, the meltdown might have gone a little bit more smoothly if 2 things had happened. Firstly, the showrunners hadn't decided to sprint through the final stretch like they were double parked outside HBO's headquarters, all because they were in a hurry to make a brand new Star Wars trilogy for Disney. A trilogy which, and this is the wonderful bit, they lost because of the fan reaction to the final season they rushed to go and make Star Wars. Poetic? Yes. Tragic? Also yes, for them anyway. Deeply on brand for Westeros? Absolutely. Secondly, it would have helped just a touch if George R.R. Martin had, finished the damn book. Or even a book. Any book, a pamphlet, a shopping list. Some kind of narrative artifact the writers could consult instead of frantically reverse engineering prophecies from blog posts written in 2013. Instead, the show overtook the novels and promptly discovered that Martin's outline was less a roadmap and more a vague set of gestures followed by a cheerful, and then several things happened. So the final season became this perfect storm of rush production, unfinished source material, and millions of fans who had spent a decade treating the lore like scripture suddenly watching the High Septon shred the pages on live TV. The result wasn't just disappointment, it was disbelief. Because fans weren't saying, "I don't like this." They were saying, "This doesn't even fit the canon I've spent 10 years memorizing, indexing, and explaining to my colleagues who absolutely didn't ask." Canon at that moment stopped feeling like a shared agreement and started feeling like something someone had dropped down the back of the sofa. Meanwhile, Star Wars, or exhausted Star Wars, was juggling several realities at once. Officially, only the films were canon. Lucas had said that repeatedly in increasingly weary tones. Everything else, books, comics, games, lived in what Lucasfilm called the expanded universe. Semi-official, blessed but not binding, sitting on a lower shelf in the canon hierarchy. But here's the thing. The last film of George Lucas's era came out in 2005. The expanded universe had been running since 1987. That's 17 years of stories, entire generations of fans growing up with the novels, the comics, the games, and especially the Thrawn trilogy, which for many of fans wasn't expanded anything. It was Star Wars. So when Disney brought the franchise in 2012 and announced a shiny new sequel trilogy, they faced a problem. Either build on nearly 2 decades of sprawling, interconnected EU material, or bulldoze the whole thing and start again. They chose bulldoze. The expanded universe wasn't declared non-canon, it was rebranded very politely as Legends. Corporate translation, we adore your enthusiasm, but none of this actually happened, please enjoy it responsibly. Fans understandably reacted as though Disney had frozen the entire expanded universe in carbonite and hung it on the wall as decor. Because official or not, the EU had become emotional canon. People believed in those stories. They built headcanon on top of canon on top of things Thrawn's Timothy Zahn dreamed up in the 90s. And now there were 2 Star Wars universes, the new Disney continuity and the EU continuity that fans continue to read, reference, defend, and sometimes outright insist was the real timeline. 2 canons, 2 realities, both passionately maintained. No wonder the franchise needed a flowchart the size of a small moon. And then back on TV, we had Supernatural, which wrapped up its 15-season epic with an official broadcast ending. But a large portion of the fandom responded with nope, we don't like this. It wasn't just disappointment, it was a fundamental rejection. And so, they created their own. Fans didn't rally around one specific alternate ending, they created thousands. A sprawling ecosystem of fix-its, rewrites, alternate universes, and emotional repair work. Not one definitive story, but a shared instinct about what should have happened. And the instinct was simple. Dean lives longer than 5 minutes into the finale, Sam lives 2, they get time, they get peace, they get to retire instead of being retired. It wasn't a single narrative, it was a collective emotional correction. A tacit agreement that the Winchesters deserved something gentler than what the script had handed them. It's a bit like a parent saying the dog went to live upstate on a farm, except in this case the dog is Dean and the farm is any ending where he's not impaled on a rusty pipe during a routine vampire job. For a huge portion of the audience, that was the version that sticks with them. Not because it was written by any one person, but because it felt right. Not canon by decree, canon by democracy. And then there's the Justice League, a film so contentious its production saga became part of pop culture folklore, culminating in a fan campaign of such relentless volume that Warner Brothers eventually blinked and said, "Fine, we'll release the 4-hour director cut, just please stop emailing us." The result is 2 official versions of the same story, 2 competing canons, 2 realities, both endorsed by the studio. Fandom didn't just influence canon, it manufactured one. And while all of this is happening in TV and film, comics, the elder statesmen of continuity chaos, were sitting in the corner like, first time? DC, bless it, had spent decades wrestling with a problem so profound it should qualify for hazard pay. Too much canon. Characters dying, resurrected, rebooted, being retconned, unretconned, merged with alternative selves, split into, or rebooted again because somebody found an inconsistency in a story from 1953 involving a gorilla with a ray gun. Their solution? Crisis events. Singular at first, Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985. A sweeping universe resetting event designed to clear up continuity by squashing the multiverse into a single streamlined timeline. It worked for about 5 minutes. Then fans missed the multiverse. Writers missed the multiverse. Editors missed the multiverse, and so the whole thing crept back. Until eventually DC said fine and did Infinite Crisis, then Final Crisis, then Rebirth, then Doomsday Clock, each an attempt to restore order by gently lighting continuity on fire. The result? Not one canon, but several, officially sanctioned by the publisher. Fans didn't have to revolt, DC simply handed them a menu. You want pre-Crisis Superman? Go ahead. You want post-Crisis Superman? Help yourself. New 52, Rebirth, Elseworlds, Dark Multiverse. pick your flavour, collect your set, build a timeline like it's flat-pack furniture. Over at Marvel, meanwhile, they didn't even bother pretending continuity could ever be stable. They embraced the multiverse early, loudly, and with the enthusiasm of a company that knows Spider-Man sells whether it's Peter, Miles, Gwen, a noir detective, or a literal pig. For comic readers, canon isn't a rule, it's a playlist. And that idea that you can choose your preferred version bleeds directly into modern fandom's relationship with TV and film. Comics lived with infinite timelines for decades, now everybody else is catching up. By this point, something has changed in the cultural weather. Fans weren't simply reacting to stories, they were correcting them, repairing them, choosing between competing versions and sometimes replacing the official one entirely. Canon was no longer a single authoritative line through a fictional universe. It had become a branching system, forks, alternatives, retellings, continuities that lived side by side, each with their own loyal defenders. Creators could still declare things, of course. Studios could issue press releases, but none of it guaranteed acceptance anymore. Because once audiences learnt they could choose the version that felt true to them, the power dynamic shifted. Fiction had stopped behaving like a monarchy. It looked more and more like a democracy, a messy one full of arguments, factions, splinter groups, rewrites, and the occasional coup. And in the middle of that chaos, one very strange question began to surface. If the official version of a story stops being the version people believe, is it still canon? Here's something we sometimes forget in the chaos of canon debates. Official canon does still exist. Studios still draw a line on a board. Writers still produce a script that becomes the sequence of events. And most fans, even the loud ones, accept that, maybe begrudgingly sometimes, but they do. You might hate the ending of Game of Thrones, you might loathe the rise of Skywalker, but they're still canon until someone with creative authority replaces them. And that's where things get interesting, because replacing canon, actually rewriting what happened, is incredibly rare. Add to a story? Yes, happens all the time. Rewrite the story? Nearly unheard of. The Dexter revival didn't remove the original finale, it added a continuation designed to soften the blow of the much reviled original. The same with the upcoming return of Line of Duty, trying to uncrumple an ending that left fans bewildered. Those revisions move forward, they stitch new canon onto old canon. But changing a moment fans had already internalised, that's another matter entirely. Because unlike most franchises, Star Wars didn't just revise canon, it retroactively altered the text. The hand-shot first change didn't recontextualise a scene, it didn't reveal a new perspective, it wasn't a flashback or a reinterpretation. It was a digital scalpel slicing into a memory millions of people shared and replacing it with a different one. A kind of cinematic gaslighting. And it's not that television hasn't tried similar moves, but look how differently those land. Dallas famously erased an entire season by saying it was a dream. St. Elsewhere went further and implied the whole show lived inside a child's imagination. Roseanne retconned the entire lottery storyline as grief fiction. And I think part of the reasons fans tolerated that was because most of it happened decades ago, long before we had social media shaped like a battering ram. But not every change to the past has to feel like somebody sneaking into your memories with a digital scalpel. Take The Witcher. Regardless of what you think of their handling of the story, and I know people have opinions, when the series swapped Henry Cavill for Liam Hemsworth, they didn't pretend nothing had changed, and they didn't overwrite 3 seasons of footage. Season 4 opens with an old man telling the legend of Geralt to a group of children. Most drift off to bed. One stays, and with the blunt confidence only a child can muster, says, "You're telling it wrong." She takes the old man's book and simply retells it. Cue a series of clips from earlier seasons, now reshot with Liam Hemsworth instead of Henry Cavill. It doesn't deny the original, it reframes it. Not a rewrite, a retelling, a little wink to the audience that says, the story's the same, the teller has changed. And that's the crucial line. Retroactive canon changes don't always anger fans, only the ones that try and overwrite their memories. The ones that acknowledge the shift or fold it into the story itself often land just fine. The only other vaguely comparable case is Blade Runner, where Ridley Scott added to Deckard's unicorn dream, But even that adds ambiguity. It doesn't erase anything you saw. Lucas didn't add context. He overwrote the established moment and tried to tell the audience the new version was the version they'd always seen. And fans rejected it because it crossed a line. Don't change the past we live with. Add to it, challenge it, reinterpret it, fine. But don't deny what happened. Most creators understand that instinctively, which is why canon revisions typically move forward, not backward. But even moving forward introduces its own problems, because not every canon moves in one direction. Books and TV diverge. TV adaptations contradict games, games contradict each other, and the audience accepts all of it. Take The Witcher again. 3 parallel canons: books, games, Netflix. Each beloved, each inconsistent, each legitimate to the people who prefer it. But here's the thing. Sometimes those branches don't stay separate. Or at least they don't feel separate. Take Thrawn. When Disney bulldozed the expanded universe, fans mourned a lot of things, but they howled about losing Grand Admiral Thrawn, Timothy Zahn's brilliant blue-skinned tactician who had anchored some of the EU's most beloved novels. He wasn't just a villain, he was the EU villain. The proof that the books weren't just padding, they mattered. Officially, the split was absolute. The old Thrawn lived in the Legends timeline, arriving after Return of the Jedi, with the Emperor and Vader dead and nearly breaking the New Republic before finally being defeated. The new Thrawn lives in Disney canon, active before A New Hope, clashing with Anakin, Vader, and the Rebels crew, exiled to another galaxy just before the original trilogy, and returning long after the Empire has already fallen. 2 timelines, 2 incompatible histories. No way to stitch them together without breaking the universe. And yet, they feel like the same man. And that's because of 2 people. Dave Filoni, who is now Chief Creative Officer of Star Wars, and Timothy Zahn, the original author. Filoni was the one who cracked the carbonite. He brought Thrawn back onto the screen, first in Star Wars Rebels, and then later in live action in Ahsoka, reintroducing him to a generation who may have never even touched the old novels, not as a background Easter egg, but as a major player in the modern Star Wars story. But Filoni didn't reinvent him, because when Disney reset the canon, they didn't just bring Thrawn back, they brought Zahn back too. Zahn was hired to write new Thrawn novels directly into Disney canon, and he'd been very open about how he approached them, writing this version of Thrawn as if the old one could still exist in some way, threading new stories into the gaps, preserving character even if the timeline changed. Same personality, same obsession with art and culture, same calm, terrifying intelligence, same tactical brilliance. The events changed and the context changed, but the character himself didn't. Which makes Thrawn a perfect modern example of how canon really works now. Not one timeline, but multiple versions of the same idea. Not erased, but reinterpreted. Not rewritten, but rebooted. Like a comic book hero recast in a new continuity. 2 Thrawns, 2 canons, 1 shared identity. And that's the real evolution. Canon didn't just split into timelines. It learned how to carry meaning across them through creators who understand what actually matters. That also occurs in video game adaptations for TV. Look at Fallout. Its 2nd television season heads towards New Vegas. The game it's based on has 4 endings. Which one is canon? The showrunner's intriguing answer, all of them, depending on which in-universe character you ask. And then video games. Video games break the whole model wide open. Games like Baldur's Gate 3 don't offer one canon ending. They offer dozens, hundreds of variations. You don't follow a canonical path, you make one. You can save the druid grove, burn it, romance half the cast, lose half the cast, become a hero, become a monster, and every one of those routes is valid. Canon becomes a branching tree, not a straight line. So we haven't moved into a world without canon, we've just moved into a world with layers of canon. The official line, the adaptation line, the branching game line, and the personal line fans curate for themselves. A single story seen through many different lenses. Canon didn't collapse, it expanded. And in that expansion, something shifted in how fans relate to the stories. Studios may hold the keys to official canon, but fans decide what matter. That's not rebellion, it's psychology. When a story becomes part of your life, when you've spent years in its characters, quoting it, arguing about it, sharing it with the people you care about, your relationship with that story becomes personal. So fans don't completely discard official canon, they supplement it. A preferred Batman run, a chosen Star Trek timeline, your own answer to whether Deckard is a replicant, a headcanon that fills in the gaps the writers left open. Most of us inhabit a mixture, official canon for the skeleton, personal canon for the soul. And that's why canon changes can hurt. When creators extend a story like Dexter, we celebrate. When creators contradict a cherished gap we filled in ourselves, we wince. And when creators try to overwrite the past, Han Greedo style, fans revolt. Not because the edit is big, but because it denies the emotional truth already rooted in memory. Canon is fragile because canon is shared. It exists in the intersection of authorial intention and audience investment. And yet, this messiness is what keeps fictional worlds alive. If canon was rigid, stories would stagnate. If canon was purely democratic, nothing would hold together. Instead, we live in a hybrid era. Official canon sets the baseline, adaptations that offer alternatives, games that encourage multiplicity, fans who curate what resonates, creators who sometimes revisit endings when audiences tell them, loudly, that the story isn't finished. So canon is less of a battlefield now, it's more of an ecosystem. Messy, layered, collaborative, occasionally contradictory, but sustained by the shared love that makes people fight for a fictional universe in the first place. And as long as stories matter, canon, all versions of it, will matter too. Canon isn't the story. Canon is the scaffolding that lets the story keep growing. I'm Dave from Geektown, and this has been Geekstorians. If you enjoyed this dive into the strange and wonderful battles behind the stories we love, you can find more episodes and everything else we do over at geektown.co.uk. And if you want weekly news, reviews, release dates, and all the other usual chaos, you can find us over on Geektown Radio wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, look after yourselves, we'll see you next time right here on Geekstorians.